The ancient elder warned the Galactic Council, "Humans don't forgive and they never forget. You can make them your partners or your patient enemies, but you cannot make them forget." The Council laughed at his paranoia, until they realized humanity had been watching them for 173 years, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal what they'd learned. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council gleamed under artificial sunlight, a monument to 10,000 years of peaceful cooperation among the stars. Representatives from 400 civilized species gathered in their designated sectors, their various forms of communication devices translating the proceedings into comprehensible formats. The air hummed with the confident energy of those who believed themselves masters of the known universe. High Arbitrator Velshan of the Cronathi Empire stood at the central podium, his crystalline body refracting light into dancing patterns across the chamber walls. His voice resonated through every translation matrix with the tone of unquestioned authority. He was speaking of humanity, those curious newcomers who had only joined the galactic stage 73 cycles ago. "The motion before this council is clear," Velshan announced, his internal luminescence pulsing with each word. "The human colony of New Terra has been found guilty of mining operations within the protected Epsilon Nebula. This is a direct violation of Treaty Statute 774. The Cronathi Empire demands immediate cessation of all human activity in Sector 19, reparations totaling 5 million standard credits, and the formal surrender of the colony's leadership for trial." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. The humans were still new, still learning the complex web of galactic law that had been refined over millennia. Surely they would see reason. Surely they would understand that the Council's judgment was final, as it had been for every other species that had ever contested its rulings. The human delegation sat in their assigned section, a group of 5 individuals wearing simple dark suits that seemed almost primitive compared to the exotic attire of other species. Their leader, Ambassador Chen Wei, remained perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask. Her silence was noted by many as either appropriate humility or concerning stoicism, but there was one voice that cut through the comfortable consensus. "Like a knife through flesh, you fools." The words came from the far corner of the chamber, from a section that most delegates had forgotten even existed. "You absolute fools. You have no idea what you're doing." Every being in the assembly turned to look at the speaker. Elder Krathix of the Velari remnant stood slowly, his ancient body supported by a gravitational harness that wheezed with each movement. The Velari were one of the oldest species in the known galaxy, their civilization predating the Council itself by thousands of years. They had voluntarily reduced their presence in galactic affairs centuries ago, maintaining only a single observer seat that was rarely occupied. Krathix was old, even by Velari standards. His skin had the texture of weathered stone, and his 6 eyes held the weight of experiences most species could not fathom. He had been alive for over 400 standard years, and he had seen things that the younger races dismissed as legend. "Elder Krathix," Velshan said, his tone carrying barely concealed irritation. "The Velari have not spoken in council chambers for 72 cycles. If you wish to invoke your observer's right to address the assembly, please do so through proper channels." "Proper channels," Krathix repeated, his voice crackling like ancient parchment. "You speak of proper channels while you light a fire you cannot extinguish. I invoke my right as a witness to history. I invoke my right as one who has seen what you are about to unleash." The chamber fell silent. Even among the oldest council members, there were few who remembered that the Velari observer held certain ancient privileges, granted when the council was first formed. The right to speak without procedural approval was one of them. Krathix moved slowly toward the center of the chamber, his harness humming. Every eye, lens, and sensory organ followed him. When he reached the speaking circle, he turned to face the assembly, his gaze sweeping across the gathered species with something that might have been pity. 173 years ago, he began, I was part of a Velari exploration fleet that ventured into the outer dark, beyond what you now call the frontier zones. We were young then, arrogant in our technology and certain of our superiority. We encountered a species that was barely beginning to explore their own star system. They called themselves by a name in their own language that roughly translated to those who strive. We called them the Terrans. A ripple of recognition moved through the human delegation. Ambassador Chen's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. We observed them, Krathix continued, as was our practice with all primitive species. We watched from the shadows as they struggled with their first faster-than-light experiments. We recorded their transmissions, studied their culture, analyzed their psychology, and what we found terrified us. Terrified? Velshan interjected, his tone mocking. The mighty Velari, terrified of a species that had barely left its homeworld? Yes, Krathix's voice was steel. Terrified. Because we recognized something in them that we had never encountered before. Not in 10,000 years of exploration. Not among the hundreds of sentient species we had catalogued. The humans possessed a quality that transcended logic, that defied our understanding of evolutionary psychology. They possessed infinite patience paired with infinite memory. He paused, letting his words sink in. But more than that, they possessed something we did not have a word for in our language. We had to create one. We called it relentless inevitability. The humans did not forgive, ever, and they never, ever forgot. Laughter echoed through parts of the chamber. The delegate from the Jin collective clicked his mandibles in amusement. Elder, with respect, you speak of observations made nearly 2 centuries ago. Surely in that time the humans have evolved beyond such primitive behavioral patterns. Have they? Krathix turned his gaze directly on the Jin delegate, and the laughter died. Have they truly? Or have you simply never given them reason to show you what they really are? He activated a holographic display with a gesture, and images filled the air above the assembly. They showed scenes from Earth's history, conflicts and wars that spanned millennia. But these were not the sanitized historical records that the humans typically shared with the galaxy. These were raw, unfiltered observations from Velari surveillance. This is what we watched, Krathix said quietly. A species that fought itself for thousands of years, that turned entire continents into battlefields over ideas, resources, and perceived slights. A species that developed weapons capable of rendering their own planet uninhabitable, and nearly used them. But what struck us most was not their capacity for violence. Every species has that. What struck us was their capacity for organized, systematic, patient vengeance. The images shifted, showing historical examples. The fall of empires, the tracking of war criminals across decades, the meticulous documentation of atrocities that would be answered generations later. You see aggression, Krathix continued. You see passion and emotion. But we saw something different. We saw a species that could nurture a grudge across generations. We saw a species that would pursue justice or revenge for years, decades, centuries if necessary. We saw a species that viewed time itself as a weapon. Ambassador Chen remained motionless in her seat, but those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes. She was listening intently to every word. Krathix turned his attention to her, and for a moment their gazes locked. Ambassador Chen knows what I speak of. She knows because her own family history proves my point. Tell them, Ambassador. Tell them about your great-great-grandmother. The entire assembly focused on the human delegation. Chen stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost conversational. My great-great-grandmother was a woman named Chen Mei Ling. She was 12 years old when her village was destroyed in one of Earth's many wars. She survived by hiding in a well for 3 days. When she emerged, everyone she had ever known was dead. The chamber was absolutely silent now. She lived to be 103 years old. Chen continued. She became a teacher, raised a family, seemed to live a quiet, peaceful life. But every single day she maintained a record. Names, faces, units, chains of command. She passed that record to her daughter. Who passed it to her daughter? Who passed it to my mother? Who passed it to me? When the war crimes tribunals finally convened 47 years after the end of that conflict, my family provided evidence that led to the prosecution of 37 individuals. The last one was found when he was 94 years old, living under an assumed name on a different continent. He was still brought to trial. She paused, letting the implications settle over the assembly. We do not forget. We do not pardon. We simply wait for justice to become possible. A charming story, Velshan said, his tone dripping with condescension. But hardly relevant to the matter at hand. We are not discussing ancient tribal conflicts. We are discussing galactic law which humanity has violated. Your ability to hold grudges does not exempt you from council justice. I am not finished, Krathix said sharply. You asked for my observations, and you will hear them all. After we studied the humans for several decades, we made a decision. We withdrew all our surveillance, deleted most of our records, and made a solemn vow among our people. We would never, under any circumstances, antagonize humanity. We would treat them with respect, honor their boundaries, and avoid giving them any reason to remember us as enemies. Cowardice, someone muttered from the Draken delegation. Survival, Krathix corrected, because we ran simulations, models based on human psychology and historical behavior. We asked ourselves a simple question. What would happen if we made an enemy of humanity? What would happen if we wronged them in a way they deemed unforgivable? He manipulated the holographic display again, and a new image appeared. It was a simulation, a predictive model showing a potential timeline. In our first model, we imagined a scenario where we inadvertently destroyed a human colony through negligence. We assumed they would respond with immediate military action, as most species would. But the model showed something different. It showed decades of silence, followed by the systematic dismantling of Velari infrastructure across the galaxy. Not through open warfare, but through economic pressure, political maneuvering, cultural infiltration, and targeted strikes against key assets. The model predicted that within 70 years, the Velari civilization would be reduced to a fraction of its former influence, all while appearing to outside observers as natural decline. He closed the display. We ran thousands of variations, different provocations, different levels of severity, different timelines. The results were always the same. Humanity would not respond with hot anger. They would respond with cold calculation. They would dismantle their enemies piece by piece, generation by generation if necessary, until nothing remained but the memory of a civilization that made the mistake of crossing them. These are just simulations, Velshan protested, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Speculations based on primitive behavior. Are they? Krathix gestured toward the human delegation. Then let me ask Ambassador Chen a direct question. If this council rules against humanity, if we demand your surrender, your compliance, your submission to terms you find unjust, what will your people do? Every being in the chamber turned to look at Chen. The human ambassador stood in silence for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. When she finally spoke, her words were measured and precise. We will comply with the letter of the council's ruling. We will evacuate New Terra. We will pay the reparations. We will hand over our colonial leadership for trial. We will do everything the council demands exactly as specified, without protest or resistance. A wave of relief swept through the assembly. Velshan's crystalline body glowed brighter. You see, Elder? The humans are reasonable beings. They understand the necessity of law and order. I'm not finished, Chen said quietly, and something in her tone made every translator in the room convey an edge that transcended language barriers. We will comply, but we will also remember. We will remember that the Cronathi Empire fabricated evidence to support their claim to the Epsilon Nebula. We will remember that the Council accepted this evidence without proper investigation. We will remember that we were judged by a system that did not allow us adequate time to prepare our defense. We will remember every species that voted in favor of this ruling, every delegate who spoke against us, every individual who profited from our compliance. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembly like a searchlight. And then we will wait. We will wait as we build our influence. We will wait as we study each of you. Your economies, your political systems, your cultural weak points, your dependencies and vulnerabilities. We will wait as we become indispensable to your supply chains, as we integrate ourselves into your financial networks, as we make ourselves necessary to your way of life. We will wait 1 generation, 2 generations, 10 generations if necessary. We are very, very good at waiting. The chamber was silent, the kind of silence that follows a sudden drop in temperature. And then when the time is right, when you have forgotten this moment, when you think of us as friends or at least neutral partners, we will collect. Not through war, not through violence, but through the same systems you use against us now. Legal frameworks, economic pressure, political maneuvering, the very tools of civilization you claim to represent. We will dismantle those who wronged us so thoroughly that historians will debate whether your civilizations ever truly mattered at all. You dare threaten this council? Velshan's voice cracked with outrage. I make no threats, Chen replied calmly. I simply answer the elder's question. I describe what will happen because it is what always happens. It is what we are. You asked about our nature, and I am telling you truthfully. We do not forgive and we do not forget. We are patient beyond your comprehension, and we are thorough beyond your imagination. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact like gravity or entropy. You can choose to believe it or not, but your belief does not alter reality." Krathix nodded slowly, a gesture of acknowledgement. "She speaks truth. And now I will tell you why I know this with absolute certainty, why our simulations were not mere speculation." He activated the holographic display once more, but this time, the images were different. They showed a species that no one in the modern council had ever heard of, a civilization of aquatic beings with elegant architecture and advanced technology. These were the Saltine. 150 years ago, they were a thriving civilization in what is now the outer frontier. They had no contact with the council, existing in relative isolation. They had, however, encountered humanity during Earth's early exploration phase. The images shifted, showing a conflict. Vessels battling in space, orbital bombardments, a colony world burning. The Saltine attacked a human exploration ship without provocation. 322 humans died. The Saltine leadership dismissed it as an unfortunate encounter with primitives who had wandered into their territory. They assumed the matter was closed. After all, humanity at that time could barely manage interstellar travel. What threat could they pose? Krathix's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. For 40 years, nothing happened. The humans withdrew from that region of space. The Saltine forgot about the incident entirely. Life continued. Their civilization prospered. And then, slowly, things began to go wrong. The holographic display showed a timeline, a cascade of seemingly unrelated events. A key trade route was disrupted when a crucial relay station suffered catastrophic failure. Investigation revealed sabotage, but no culprit was found. 3 years later, their main economic partner suddenly shifted their trade agreements, leaving the Saltine economy struggling. 5 years after that, a plague swept through their agricultural centers. Not a natural plague, but one that specifically targeted their staple food crop. Genetic analysis suggested artificial origin, but again, no source could be identified. The timeline continued, event after event, each one individually explainable, but together forming a clear pattern. Their government destabilized, their economy collapsed, their population declined. Within 60 years of their attack on that human ship, the Saltine civilization was gone. Not conquered. Not destroyed in glorious battle, simply dissolved. Their worlds are still there, mostly abandoned now, home to scattered remnants who barely remember the glory of their ancestors. "And you claim humans did this?" Felshawn asked, but his voice wavered. "I don't claim," Krathix replied. "I know, because I was part of the Velari team that investigated the collapse. We found evidence. Subtle evidence, carefully hidden, but evidence nonetheless. Human operatives had been involved in every major disaster the Saltine faced. Different humans, different methods, but always present, always working toward the same goal." He turned to face the assembly directly. "The most terrifying part? We found a human data cache, probably left deliberately so that someone would eventually understand. It contained a single document, a detailed plan for the dismantling of Saltine civilization, written within 1 week of the attack on that exploration ship. A plan that was then executed with perfect precision over 6 decades. They planned their revenge before they even had the capacity to carry it out," someone whispered from the collective mind. "Delegation, exactly," Krathix confirmed. They knew they couldn't respond immediately, so they waited. They built their capabilities. They studied their enemy. They prepared. And when they were ready, they executed a plan so comprehensive, so carefully orchestrated, that their target never even knew they were under attack until it was far too late. Ambassador Chen still stood in her place, her expression unchanged. She neither confirmed nor denied Krathix's story. She simply existed, a human-shaped reminder of what the Elder was describing. But that wasn't the only example. Krathix continued. "We found records of 3 other species that humanity encountered during their expansion phase. 3 other species that had wronged them in various ways. Piracy, territorial disputes, the enslavement of human explorers, all relatively minor incidents by galactic standards. And all 3 of those species are now either extinct or reduced to primitive, scattered populations." The holographic display showed their stories in rapid succession, each one following a similar pattern. Initial conflict, human withdrawal, decades of silence, then systematic collapse disguised as natural decline or internal strife. We studied these patterns, Krathik said. We tried to find any instance where humanity had truly forgiven a transgression, where they had let go of a grudge, where they had shown mercy to those who had wronged them. We found none. Zero. Not in their entire recorded history, either internal or external. They have a saying on Earth, forgive and forget. But it is aspirational, not descriptive. They teach it because it does not come naturally. It requires conscious effort to overcome their basic nature. He gestured toward Chen. The ambassador speaks of waiting generations. This is not hyperbole. Human family lines will maintain vendettas across centuries. Their institutions will pursue objectives long after the original architects are dead. They have a sense of collective identity and collective memory that most species simply do not possess at that level. This is absurd, the gene delegate interjected, his mandibles clicking rapidly. You're describing a species of patient monsters, but I have worked with humans. They are emotional, often impulsive. They laugh, they cry, they feel deeply. This does not match your description, doesn't it? Krathix turned to face the gene delegation. Tell me, Delegate Jarkin, have you ever wronged a human? Truly wronged one? Not a minor inconvenience or social faux pas, but a real injury? Of course not, Jarkin replied quickly. Then you have no data. You know only their friendly face, the face they show to neutrals and allies. You have never seen what they become when you make yourself their enemy. Krathix's 6 eyes seemed to bore into the delegate. And I pray, to whatever deities your people recognize that you never do. Velshan stood at the central podium, his crystalline body no longer glowing with confidence. The weight of the elder's words hung in the chamber like a physical presence. He looked at the assembled delegates, then at the human contingent, then back at Krathix. Even if we accept your analysis, Elder, Velshan said slowly, the law is clear. The humans violated council statute. We cannot simply ignore this because we fear potential future reprisals. Can't you? Krathix asked. Or is it that your pride will not allow you to admit you might be wrong? We are not wrong. The evidence clearly shows... The evidence shows what the Chronothi wanted it to show, Krathix interrupted. Did you investigate the source? Did you verify the chain of custody? Did you question why this evidence only surfaced after humanity discovered massive helium-3 deposits in the region adjacent to the Epsilon Nebula? Did you ask why the Chronothi suddenly became concerned about environmental protection in an area they had ignored for the past 300 cycles? The chamber erupted in murmurs. Several delegates began accessing their data terminals, apparently reviewing details they had previously glossed over. The evidence was presented through proper channels, Velshan insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Proper channels that the Chronothi effectively control through their web of alliances and economic dependencies, Krathix countered. You see, this is exactly what I mean. The humans are not the only ones who plan patiently, but there is a crucial difference. When others scheme and plot, they do so for advantage, for profit, for the expansion of their influence. When humans plot, it is for justice, for vengeance, for the settling of accounts. The motivation matters. He turned back to address the full assembly. I am not asking you to ignore the law. I am asking you to investigate properly, to question what you have been told, to ensure that justice is actually being served, rather than merely the appearance of justice. Because if you proceed with an unjust ruling, you will not be punishing criminals. You will be creating enemies. And human enemies are like no others in the known galaxy. Ambassador Chen finally moved, walking slowly to the center of the chamber where both Krathix and Velshan stood. She carried a small data tablet, which she placed on the holographic projector interface. With the Council's permission, she said formally, I would like to present evidence that was not included in the original Chronothi filing. Evidence that our investigation team was still compiling when the charges were filed. Evidence that we attempted to submit through proper channels but which was blocked at the preliminary review stage. Velshan looked uncomfortable. The deadline for evidence submission was 2 weeks before we were notified of the charges. Chen interrupted smoothly. An interesting timeline, wouldn't you say? We were given charges that required us to have prepared our defense before we knew we were being accused. She activated the tablet, and new images filled the holographic display. They showed communication, logs, financial transactions, and surveillance footage that painted a very different picture of the situation. The mining operations on New Terra were conducted with full environmental protocols, as these logs demonstrate. The Epsilon Nebula designation as a protected area was filed by the Cronathi Empire 3 days after our colony was established, retroactively claiming protection for a region they had never previously shown interest in. The environmental damage cited in their report? Fabricated data, as our independent analysis shows. The helium-3 deposits we discovered? They lie in unclaimed space adjacent to the nebula, but the Cronathi filing conveniently redrew the boundaries to include our discovery. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder. Several delegates were now actively accessing their own records, cross-referencing Chen's data with what they had been told. Furthermore, Chen continued, her voice never rising above a calm, professional tone, we have evidence of Cronathi operatives attempting to infiltrate our mining operations, presumably to sabotage our equipment and create the very violations they now accuse us of committing. We have communications between Cronathi commercial interests and their government, discussing the economic benefits of forcing humanity out of the sector. We have a paper trail that shows this entire proceeding was engineered from the start. Velshan's crystal body had lost all its luminescence. He stood like a dull stone, processing what was being revealed. These are serious allegations. Yes, they are, Chen agreed. And if you had allowed us proper time to prepare our defense, we would have presented them through the appropriate channels. Instead, we were rushed to judgment, presumably before we could compile this evidence. The question now is, what will the council do with this information? Krathix watched the exchange with something that might have been satisfaction. You see now? This is what I meant. The humans did not come here with weapons. They did not threaten violence. They came with patience, with preparation, and with truth. They let the Cronathi overextend, let them become confident in their deception, and then they presented the reality. This is how humans fight, when they believe they are in the right. He turned to face Velshan directly. But make no mistake, High Arbitrator, if the Council ignores this evidence, if you proceed with an unjust ruling, despite knowing the truth, then the humans will shift strategies. They will comply, as the ambassador said, but they will also remember that the Council is not a body of justice, but merely another political entity serving the interests of the powerful, and they will act accordingly. The weight of that statement settled over the assembly like a shroud. A new voice spoke up, breaking the tense silence. It was Councillor Miraseth of the Luminal Collective, one of the oldest and most respected members of the assembly. I move that we postpone this ruling pending a full independent investigation of all evidence, both that originally presented and this new material from the human delegation. Furthermore, I move that we investigate the procedural irregularities that prevented the human evidence from being heard in the first place. I second the motion, came a voice from the Verithian delegation. As do I, added another from the Free Traders Union. One by one, delegates began voicing their support. The tide was turning. Velshan looked around the chamber, seeing his carefully constructed case crumbling before his eyes. The motion is accepted, he finally said, his voice barely audible. We will reconvene in 30 cycles to review the complete evidence. But Chen was not finished. She stood before the assembly, and when she spoke, her words were carefully chosen, each one deliberate. The human delegation appreciates the Council's willingness to pursue truth and justice. However, I want to make something perfectly clear to everyone present. This outcome, this willingness to investigate, to question, to pursue actual justice, rather than convenient judgments, this is exactly what we hoped for. This is why we joined the galactic community. We wanted to believe that there were other species who valued fairness, who would stand up against corruption and manipulation. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the entire assembly. But understand this, we did not expect it. Our entire contingency planning was based on the assumption that we would be railroaded, that justice would be denied. that we would need to execute long-term strategies to survive in a hostile galactic environment. We prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. That is what we do. That is who we are. Elder Krathik spoke of our nature, of our refusal to forgive or forget. He is correct. But he left out one crucial detail. We also remember kindness. We remember justice. We remember those who stood with us when it would have been easier to look away. The Luminal Collective, the Verithians, the Free Traders Union, and any others who support this investigation, you have earned something precious. You have earned our trust. And human trust, while difficult to gain, is also nearly impossible to lose once given. She turned to face Velshan in the section where the Kronathi delegation sat. But for those who sought to manipulate us, to cheat us, to deny us justice, you have earned something very different. You have earned our attention. And I promise you, you will have it for as long as necessary. After Chen returned to her seat, Krathix remained standing in the center of the chamber. He looked impossibly ancient in that moment, a being who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, who carried the weight of centuries of accumulated wisdom. I have one more thing to say, he announced, his voice stronger than it had been throughout the entire proceeding. A final warning to this assembly, to the Kronathi Empire, and to any species in this galaxy who might, in the future, consider humanity an easy target. He gestured toward the human delegation. You look at them and you see a young species. They have been in space for barely a century. They have been part of this council for less than one human lifetime. You think you understand them because you have traded with them, negotiated with them, observed their behavior in times of peace. But I have studied their entire history, not just their recent actions. I have reviewed thousands of years of their development, from their earliest recorded conflicts to their present day, and I have identified a pattern that you need to understand. The holographic display activated again, showing a timeline of human history. Humanity has fought thousands of wars. Major conflicts, minor skirmishes, everything in between. They have developed philosophies of peace, religions that preach forgiveness, cultural movements that advocate for non-violence, and yet across their entire history, one thing remains constant. They never truly let go of a legitimate grievance. The timeline highlighted specific examples. They fought wars that lasted 100 years. They pursued war criminals for 7 decades after conflicts ended. They maintained cultural memories of injustices across millennia. Their word for someone who betrays trust, traitor, is one of the worst insults in their language. They have formal legal concepts around the idea of statute of limitations, specifically because without such laws, they would pursue justice indefinitely. Do you understand what this means? Krathix's 6 eyes swept across the assembly. It means that every human who dies believing justice was denied becomes a story, a lesson, a motivating force for the generations that follow. It means that human civilization has a memory that transcends individual lifespans. It means that from their perspective, 73 cycles is not a long time. It is barely the beginning. He pointed at Velshan. If you had succeeded in your deception today, if you had pushed through an unjust ruling, humanity would not have launched a war. They would not have engaged in terrorism or violence. They would have quietly accepted the ruling, paid the fine, handed over their leaders. And then they would have begun a process that would take generations to complete. They would have studied every aspect of Kronathi society. They would have identified your economic dependencies, your political vulnerabilities, your cultural pressure points. They would have infiltrated your institutions not through force but through competence and reliability. Humans are remarkably good at making themselves indispensable. They would have waited until you needed them, until your economy couldn't function without human trade, until your political system had incorporated human advisors, until your culture had absorbed human influence, and then, perhaps 50 years from now, perhaps 100, when every Kronathi alive had forgotten this incident, when the very idea of humans as enemies seemed absurd, something would go wrong. A financial crisis, perhaps, a political scandal, a social movement that destabilizes your society, and if anyone investigated deeply enough, they would find human fingerprints, subtle and deniable, but unmistakably there. Krathik's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The Kronathi Empire would not fall in a day. It would erode piece by piece until it was a shadow of itself, and the humans would never claim credit. There would be no victory parades, no monuments to their triumph. They would simply move on to the next item on their very, very long list. The Kronathi delegate, A being named Thaxilon, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, finally stood. His form was humanoid but scaled, with bioluminescent patterns that flickered with agitation. "These accusations are," he began. But Krathix cut him off. "Not accusations, observations, warnings, lessons from history. Whether you deceived the council deliberately or were merely negligent in your evidence gathering, the result is the same. You have placed yourself on the wrong side of human memory. Now, thanks to this investigation, you have a chance to make amends, to demonstrate that the error was honest rather than malicious. I strongly suggest you take that opportunity." Thaxilon's bioluminescent pattern shifted through several colors, none of them suggesting confidence or comfort. He looked at the human delegation, and whatever he saw in their calm, patient expressions made him sit back down without another word. Krathix turned back to the full assembly. "I know many of you think I am being dramatic. I know some of you believe I am fear-mongering or perhaps simply senile. But I have staked my credibility, my reputation, and the honor of the Velari people on these words. I have violated our self-imposed silence because I believe this moment is critical, not just for humanity or the Chronothi, but for the future of this entire council. You stand at a crossroads. One path leads to a future where humanity becomes a true partner in galactic civilization, where their unique qualities, their persistence, their refusal to accept injustice, become assets rather than threats. The other path leads to a future where humanity exists on the periphery, always watching, always waiting, pursuing their own objectives through methods you will never fully understand until it is too late." He looked directly at Ambassador Chen. "I hope, for all our sakes, that we choose the first path, because I have seen what lies down the second one, and I would not wish that future on anyone." Chen stood and walked to stand beside Krathix. The ancient Velari and the human diplomat, separated by centuries of evolution and vastly different cultures, stood together before the assembly. "Elder Krathix has shown us great respect today," Chen said. "He has shared knowledge that his people chose to keep hidden, at personal cost to himself and his civilization's policy of non-interference. He has done this because he believes in the possibility of a better outcome, a better future. And because of that, I will tell you something that I was not authorized to share, but which I believe you need to hear." She took a breath, and for the first time since entering the chamber, emotion flickered across her face. "When the Chronothi charges were filed, when we realized we were facing a rigged system designed to deny us justice, our government held an emergency session. The debate lasted for 6 days. One faction argued for immediate withdrawal from the council, for a return to human-only space, for the conclusion that galactic civilization was just another political game not worth playing. The other faction argued for patience, for giving the system one more chance, for believing that somewhere in this assembly there were species who genuinely valued justice over convenience. That faction won by a single vote. One vote out of a governing council of 27 representatives. Do you understand how close you came to losing us entirely?" The chamber was absolutely silent. "We are here today because 13 humans believed you were worth believing in. 13 people thought that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could be better than humanity's often brutal history. Elder Krathix has proven them right. Councillor Miraseth, the Verithians, the Free Traders Union, and everyone who supported a real investigation have proven them right." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembly once more. "But understand this, there will not be a third chance. If we discover that this investigation is merely another delaying tactic, another form of manipulation, or if the evidence is ignored despite its validity, that faction arguing for withdrawal will win. And humanity will chart its own course through the galaxy, neither with you nor against you, but separate from you. And separated from you," she continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. "We will pursue our interests without consideration for your laws, your borders, or your sensibilities. We will not attack you. We will not declare war. We will simply stop pretending that your rules apply to us. And I promise you, a humanity that views galactic civilization as hostile territory will be far more dangerous than a humanity that believes in the possibility of justice." Krathix nodded slowly. "She speaks truth. The humans you see before you, the ones who wear your diplomatic clothing and speak your languages and follow your protocols, These are the humans who still have hope. They are the best of humanity, chosen specifically because they can bridge the gap between human nature and galactic expectations. But if you break their trust, if you demonstrate that hope was misplaced, what comes after will be very, very different. 30 cycles passed. In that time, the Council's independent investigation team, carefully selected to exclude both Chronothi and human influence, worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. What they found was damning. The evidence against humanity had indeed been fabricated, though the investigators carefully noted that it was unclear whether this was deliberate deception or merely negligent evidence gathering. The protected status of the Epsilon Nebula had been filed after the human colony was established, and the boundaries had been drawn to conveniently include valuable resources that the Chronothi had been seeking for decades. More disturbingly, the investigators found a pattern of similar tactics used by Chronothi corporate interests across multiple sectors, targeting not just humans, but several other species. The procedural irregularities that had prevented humanity from submitting their evidence were traced back to a Chronothi assistant administrator who had been selectively enforcing deadlines based on political considerations. When the council reconvened, the atmosphere was markedly different from the first session. High Arbitrator Velshan was not present. He had resigned his position 2 weeks earlier, citing personal reasons. In his place stood Arbitrator Kelmira of the Luminal Collective, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix that refracted light in calming patterns. The findings of the independent investigation are clear, Kelmira announced, her voice resonating through every translation matrix with absolute clarity. The charges against humanity were without merit. The evidence was compromised. The procedures were violated. This council owes the human delegation and the people of New Terra a formal apology. She paused, allowing the words to carry their full weight. Furthermore, we have identified systematic abuses of council procedures by various Chronothi entities. The Chronothi Empire will face sanctions, including suspension of their voting privileges for a period of 50 cycles, substantial fines to be paid to the affected parties, and mandatory reforms of their evidence-gathering and filing processes. Thaxilon, the Chronothi delegate, sat in his designated area looking diminished. The bioluminescent patterns on his scales flickered erratically, a sign of profound distress in his species. "Does the Chronothi delegation wish to address the council?" Kelmira asked. Thaxilon stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the confidence or authority it had held in previous sessions. "The Chronothi Empire accepts the findings of the investigation. We acknowledge the harm done to humanity and other species. We will comply with all sanctions and reforms mandated by the Council." He turned to face the human delegation directly. "Ambassador Chen, on behalf of the Chronothi Empire, I offer our formal apology for the injury done to your people. We also wish to extend an offer of reparations beyond what the Council has mandated, as a gesture of our commitment to making amends." Chen stood, her expression neutral. She let the silence stretch for a long moment before responding. "The human delegation acknowledges the Chronothi apology. We will review any reparation offers through appropriate diplomatic channels." It was a carefully neutral response, neither accepting nor rejecting, neither warm nor hostile. It left everything unresolved, which, as Krathix had taught them, was exactly how humans preferred to leave things when dealing with those who had wronged them. Krathix himself stood from his observation seat. "If the Council permits, I would like to offer a final observation before we close this matter. The Elder's wisdom is always welcome," Kelmira said warmly. "Thank you, Arbitrator. I want to speak about what has happened here over these past 30 cycles, because I believe it represents something important, something that might define the future of this council." He gestured toward the Chronothi delegation. "The Chronothi Empire made mistakes, serious mistakes that undermined the integrity of this body. But when confronted with evidence of these mistakes, when given the opportunity to either double down on deception or acknowledge truth, they chose truth. That matters. It may not erase the harm done, but it matters." Then he turned to the human delegation. "And humanity, faced with injustice, chose to work within the system rather than abandoning it or undermining it. They presented evidence. They argued their case. They gave us a chance to be better. That also matters. His 6 eyes swept across the entire assembly. What we have witnessed is not just the resolution of a single dispute. We have witnessed the possibility of a new kind of galactic civilization, one where mistakes are acknowledged rather than covered up, one where newcomers are given genuine justice rather than token representation, one where the powerful are held accountable by truth rather than protected by influence. But, he continued, his voice hardening slightly, we have also witnessed how fragile this possibility is. We came within a single vote of losing humanity's participation. We came within one elder's decision to break his people's long silence of allowing a grave injustice to proceed unchecked. This should terrify you, because it means we are always one decision, one moment of corruption or negligence away from catastrophe. He looked directly at Kelmira. Arbitrator, I formally request that the Velari remnant be permitted to upgrade our status from observer to full member of this council. We have remained apart for too long, believing that galactic politics were beneath our concern. But if this incident has taught me anything, it is that wisdom unused is wisdom wasted. My people have knowledge that could help this body avoid future disasters. It is time we shared it. A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. The Velari had not sought full membership in over 300 cycles. Their return would significantly alter the council's dynamics. The council welcomes this request, Kelmira said immediately. We will schedule a formal ceremony for your people's full membership within the next cycle. Your wisdom has already proven invaluable. We would be honored to have it available for all future deliberations. Then she turned to the human delegation. Ambassador Chen, the council would also like to extend an offer to humanity. We recognize that your people have shown remarkable restraint and good faith throughout this process. We would like to offer humanity a seat on the council's executive committee, traditionally reserved for the most experienced and trusted members. This is highly irregular for a species so new to galactic civilization, but we believe you have proven that you deserve a voice at the highest levels of council governance. Chen's expression remained carefully neutral, but those who knew her well could see the slight widening of her eyes, the barely perceptible straightening of her spine. This was an unexpected development. The human delegation is honored by this offer, she said carefully. However, we would need to consult with our government before accepting such a significant responsibility. We would not want to accept a position we were not prepared to fulfill with the dedication and integrity it deserves. Of course, Kelmira replied. Take whatever time you need. The offer will remain open. 3 cycles later, in a secure communication facility on the human colony of New Terra, Ambassador Chen stood before a holographic display showing the faces of Earth's diplomatic council. Her report had been thorough, detailing every moment of the proceedings, every implication, every opportunity and risk. So, one of the council members, Director Zhang, said heavily, "We passed the test, barely." "We passed this test," Chen corrected. "There will be others." The Kronathi situation proved that corruption and self-interest are not unique to humanity. Every species in the council has factions that will prioritize their own advantage over justice. We need to decide if we want to be part of the system that keeps those factions in check, or if we want to operate outside that system. The executive committee seat, another council member, Ambassador Okafor, mused. That's significant. That's not just token representation. That's real power. And real responsibility, Chen countered. If we accept, we're committing to making the council work. We're saying we believe in galactic civilization as a concept, not just as a convenient trading platform. And if we decline, Zhang asked, then we're saying we don't trust them even after they prove themselves capable of justice. We're saying we prefer to remain apart, to keep our distance, to maintain our independence at the cost of influence. Chen paused. And honestly, that might not be wrong. Elder Krathix was correct about our nature. We don't forgive easily, and we never forget. The Kronathi apologized, but that doesn't erase what they tried to do. Can we really work alongside them? Can we trust a system that almost railroaded us? The diplomatic council was silent for a long moment. Finally, a third voice spoke up. Counselor Ivanova, one of the 13 who had voted to give the galactic system one more chance. I think we need to accept, she said quietly, not because we trust them completely, not because we've forgiven the Kranathi, but because Elder Krathix was also right about something else. We have a choice about what kind of species we become on the galactic stage. We can be the patient predators he described, always watching, always waiting for the moment to strike back at those who wronged us. And we'd be good at it, terrifyingly good. But is that really what we want to be? Is that the legacy we want to leave? She leaned forward, her expression intense. Or can we be something more? Can we be the species that demands justice, that holds others accountable, that makes the system better rather than just protecting ourselves from it? Can we use our particular talents, our persistence, our refusal to let things go, to create something worth being part of? That's asking a lot, Zhang said. That's asking us to be the galaxy's conscience, the ones who won't let injustice slide. That's asking us to make enemies because there will always be species who prefer convenient lies to uncomfortable truths. Yes, Ivanova agreed, but consider the alternative. If we withdraw, if we focus only on human interest, what kind of galaxy are we leaving for our children? One where humanity is an isolated fortress, powerful but alone? Or one where humanity is integrated, influential, using our unique perspective to make things better for everyone? Ambassador Chen listened to the debate continue for another hour. Arguments for acceptance, arguments for rejection, concerns about overcommitment, fears about isolation. Finally, when it seemed like no consensus would emerge, she spoke up. I have a proposal, she said. What if we accept the executive committee seat, but with a condition? What if we tell them that humanity will serve as what we might call the conscience committee member? Our specific role will be to investigate claims of injustice, to advocate for those who might otherwise be steamrolled by larger powers, to be the voice that asks uncomfortable questions. She continued, warming to the idea. We make it clear from the start. This is what we bring to the table. We're not going to be the diplomat who smooths over problems or finds convenient compromises. We're going to be the one who insists on real investigations, genuine accountability, and meaningful justice. Some species will hate us for it, but others, like Elder Krathix's people, like the Luminal Collective, like anyone who genuinely wants a fair system, they'll appreciate having us there. So we accept the seat, Counselor Okafor said slowly, but we define the terms of our participation. We make our nature a feature, not a bug. Exactly, Chen said. We stop pretending to be something we're not. We embrace what Elder Krathix described, but we channel it toward constructive purposes. We become the species that remembers every injustice, but works within the system to prevent future ones rather than just punishing past ones. The vote was closer than Chen would have liked, but it passed. 15 in favor, 12 opposed. Not a ringing endorsement, but enough to proceed. 2 cycles later, Ambassador Chen stood before the Galactic Council once more. This time, she was not defending humanity against false charges. She was accepting a position of significant responsibility. The ceremony was formal, steeped in traditions that dated back thousands of years. Representatives from every council species were present, along with observers from dozens of unaligned civilizations. The chamber had been decorated with symbols representing the unity and diversity of galactic civilization. Kelmira, as the current head of the council, conducted the ceremony. She spoke of humanity's resilience, their commitment to justice, their valuable perspective as newcomers to galactic society. It was all very diplomatic, very polished, very safe. Then it was Chen's turn to speak. She had prepared remarks, carefully vetted by the diplomatic council, designed to sound grateful and humble and appropriately awed by the responsibility. She started to deliver those remarks, but halfway through she stopped. She looked out at the assembly, at the hundreds of species represented, at the ancient institution they were all part of, and she decided to tell them the truth instead. I'm going to set aside my prepared remarks, she said, and a murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. Because I think you deserve honesty, especially at a moment like this. Elder Krathix told you about human nature. He told you that we don't forgive, that we don't forget, that we are patient to the point of being dangerous. He was right. But he left out some important context that I think you need to understand if we're going to work together. She took a breath. We developed these traits not because we're inherently vengeful or cruel, but because we had to. Our own history is filled with examples of atrocities that went unpunished, injustices that were swept under the rug, victims who were forgotten. We learned painfully and over thousands of years that if we didn't remember, if we didn't hold people accountable, if we didn't pursue justice relentlessly, then nothing would ever get better. Our refusal to forget is not about holding grudges. It's about ensuring that history doesn't repeat itself. Our patience in pursuing accountability is not about revenge. It's about creating a world where people think twice before committing wrongs because they know there will be consequences, even if those consequences take decades to arrive. She gestured to the assembled delegates. I tell you this because I want you to understand what humanity brings to this executive committee. We will be uncomfortable to work with. We will ask difficult questions. We will push for investigations when it would be easier to move on. We will insist on accountability when it would be more convenient to forgive and forget. But we will do this not because we want to make enemies, but because we believe in the possibility of a just civilization. We believe that a system that holds everyone accountable, even the powerful, even our friends, is stronger than one that protects the influential at the expense of the vulnerable. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the chamber. Some of you will come to resent our presence. Some of you will wish you had never offered us this seat. That's fine. We're not here to be popular. We're here to be fair, to be thorough, and to be persistent in the pursuit of justice. But I also want to say this. Elder Krathix was right about another aspect of human nature. We remember kindness as strongly as we remember wrongs. Every species in this chamber that supported the investigation, that stood up for justice even when it was politically inconvenient. You have earned something from humanity that is very difficult to obtain, our trust. And human trust means something. It means we will stand by you when you face difficulties. It means we will remember your actions when you need allies. It means we consider you partners, not just in convenience but in genuine shared purpose. The Velari Remnant, the Luminal Collective, the Verithians, the Free Traders Union, and yes, even the Chronothi who ultimately chose truth over deception, you have all earned this from us. She looked directly at Thaxilon, the Chronothi delegate who sat very still in his section. The Chronothi Empire wronged us. That is fact, and it is recorded in both your history and ours. But when confronted with evidence of that wrong, your people chose accountability over continued deception. That is also fact, and it is also recorded. Both facts will be remembered. Both will influence how humanity deals with the Chronothi in the future. We don't forget the harm, but we also don't ignore the amends. This is the balance we try to strike, and it is the balance we will bring to our service on the executive committee. She concluded her speech by returning to a more traditional format, thanking the council for their trust, promising to serve with integrity, all the things that were expected. But it was the unscripted middle portion that everyone would remember. After the ceremony, Elder Krathix approached Chen in one of the side chambers where delegates were gathering for informal discussions. That was quite a speech, he said, his ancient voice carrying a note that might have been approval. You told them exactly what to expect. No sugarcoating, no false promises. I learned from you, Chen replied. You warned them about us. I figured I should clarify what that warning means in practice. Krathix's 6 eyes focused on her with unnerving intensity. You understand that you've made your job significantly harder? If you had been more diplomatic, more vague about your intentions, you could have operated more freely. Now they'll be watching for exactly the behaviors you described. Good, Chen said simply. Let them watch. We have nothing to hide. And honestly, if they know what we're going to do, if they understand that every injustice will be pursued, every deception will be investigated, maybe they'll think twice before committing them in the first place. Prevention rather than punishment, Krathix mused. That's actually rather wise. Use your reputation as a deterrent. Is that so different from what you did? Chen asked. You warned the council about us specifically to prevent them from making an enemy of humanity. You used our reputation to protect both us and them from a destructive conflict. True, Krathix acknowledged. It seems we think alike, Ambassador. That's either very fortunate or very dangerous. Probably both, Chen said with a slight smile. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the other delegates mingle. Then Krathix spoke again, his voice lower, more personal. There is something I did not mention in my speech to the council, something I thought you should know, human too well, to very old being who has seen too much. I'm listening. When we first encountered your species, when we realized what you were, We were not just afraid of what you might do to us. We were afraid of what you might do to yourselves. A species that never forgives, that pursues justice or vengeance across generations. Such a species can easily destroy itself in internal conflicts that never end. He turned his 6 eyes directly on her. We watched your species closely for decades, waiting to see if you would tear yourselves apart. And you almost did several times. Wars that lasted lifetimes, feuds that passed from parents to children, cycles of revenge that seemed endless. But then, he continued, and something like wonder crept into his ancient voice. You did something remarkable. You created systems, legal frameworks, truth and reconciliation commissions, international courts, mechanisms for justice that didn't require endless revenge. You found ways to channel your nature into structures that could satisfy your need for accountability, without descending into permanent warfare. It was not perfect. Many times these systems failed, but you kept trying, kept refining, kept building better ways to balance your need for justice with the practical necessity of moving forward. That's when we stopped being afraid of you destroying yourselves and started being afraid of what you might do to everyone else. Chen processed this information carefully. So your warning to the Council wasn't just about protecting us. It was about protecting them from a species that had learned to harness its most dangerous traits. Exactly. An individual human can be reasoned with, can be convinced to forgive, can be moved past anger. But human institutions, human civilization as a collective entity, that is something else entirely. It has the patience of immortality, the resources of an entire species, and the unwavering focus of a system designed specifically to never let go. He paused. That is what I saw when I looked at you during my speech. Not an individual who might act rashly or emotionally, but a representative of a system, a civilization, an entity that will outlast all of us and will remember everything we do. And now, Krathix concluded, you have placed that system at the heart of the Galactic Council. You have made humanity's unforgiving memory part of the institutional structure of galactic civilization. I am not sure if this is brilliant or terrifying. Why can't it be both? Chen asked. The old Villari's eyes seemed to twinkle with something that might have been amusement. Indeed, why can't it be both? The executive committee chamber was smaller than the main council assembly, designed for working sessions rather than grand proclamations. Around the circular table sat representatives from the 7 species that held permanent committee seats, along with 3 rotating members who served 2-year terms. Ambassador Chen, now officially Executive Counselor Chen, was presenting her findings on a complaint filed by the Arathi Union against the Draken Confederation. The case was complex, involving trade disputes, alleged border violations, and claims of cultural appropriation that had escalated into a diplomatic crisis. After 6 weeks of investigation, Chen said, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had been working too hard for too long, we have determined that both parties share responsibility for the current situation. The Draken did violate the terms of their trade agreement, but only after the Arathi implemented tariffs that were technically legal but clearly designed to circumvent previously negotiated terms. The border violations were the result of outdated star charts that both sides were using, with neither party bothering to update despite changes in local stellar phenomena. And the cultural appropriation claims, while emotionally charged, do not actually violate any existing council regulations. She paused, looking at each committee member in turn. However, what troubles me most is not the specific violations, but the pattern they represent. This conflict escalated because both sides assumed bad faith from the other and responded in kind. Small grievances became major incidents because neither side was willing to communicate openly about their actual concerns. The Draken representative on the committee, a large reptilian being named Carax, shifted uncomfortably. With respect, Counselor Chen, this seems like a relatively minor matter. Why did you spend 6 weeks investigating what amounts to a trade dispute and some hurt feelings? Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her tone made everyone at the table pay closer attention. Because 5 years ago, the Kranathi Empire dismissed their conflict with humanity as a minor matter that could be handled through procedural maneuvering. Because small injustices ignored have a way of becoming large conflicts that threaten the entire system. Because this council's credibility depends on taking every legitimate grievance seriously, not just the ones that involve major powers or threaten immediate violence. She pulled up holographic displays showing her investigation results. The Orthy Union has filed 3 previous complaints against various trade partners over the past decade. All 3 were dismissed at the preliminary review stage as insufficient to warrant investigation. All 3 involved the same pattern: legal maneuvers designed to circumvent the spirit of agreements while technically adhering to their letter. Meanwhile, the Draken Confederation has been involved in 7 border disputes in the same time frame. 4 were resolved through negotiation, but 3 escalated into armed standoffs that required council intervention. In all 3 cases, the root cause was inadequate communication about territorial boundaries combined with outdated information. She looked directly at Carax. These are not isolated incidents. These are patterns that indicate systemic problems. And if we don't address the systemic problems, we'll keep dealing with the same conflicts over and over, just with different species and different excuses. Counselor Miraseth of the Luminal Collective, who had become one of Chen's strongest allies on the committee, spoke up. What do you propose, Counselor? First, both the Arathi Union and the Draken Confederation need to issue formal apologies to each other and commit to better communication protocols. Second, we need new regulations about legal but deliberately obstructive trade practices. Third, we need mandatory star chart updates for all species operating in contested or unclear border regions, with Council resources dedicated to ensuring accuracy. She continued. But more than these specific fixes, I propose we establish what I'm calling the early warning system. We task a dedicated team with analyzing complaint patterns, identifying systemic issues before they explode into major conflicts, and proactively addressing problems at the root, rather than waiting until they've grown into crises. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then Elder Krathix, who had indeed taken a seat on the executive committee representing the Velari remnant, spoke. This is very human thinking, he observed. Most species would resolve the immediate dispute and move on. You want to prevent the next dispute and the one after that and the one after that, extending your focus indefinitely into the future. Yes, Chen agreed simply, because that's how you build a civilization that lasts. You don't just address problems as they arise. You create systems that prevent those problems from occurring in the first place. And if those systems fail, asked Counselor Tirvan of the Mechanist Union, a being whose body was more technology than biology at this point. Then you learn from the failure, adjust the systems, and try again, Chen replied. Perfection is impossible, but continuous improvement is achievable if you're willing to put in the work and honest about your failures. Over the next several hours, the committee debated Chen's proposals. Some were accepted immediately, others were modified. A few were tabled for further consideration. By the end of the session, a framework had emerged that would significantly change how the council approached conflict prevention. As the meeting adjourned, Carax approached Chen directly. Counselor, I want to apologize for my initial response. You were right to take this matter seriously. I was thinking like a Draken, focused on immediate threats and direct challenges. You were thinking like a human, I suppose. Looking at patterns, planning for the future, refusing to let small problems fester. Chen nodded acknowledgement. We all bring our perspectives to this committee. That's the strength of diversity. But I appreciate your willingness to reconsider. That's actually become quite rare in galactic politics. You've made it less rare, Carax said. 5 years ago, most committee members would have dismissed your concerns and moved on. Now we've learned to take a closer look when you flag something as important. You've trained us to think more carefully, to investigate more thoroughly. Trained you? Chen raised an eyebrow. Perhaps influenced is a better word, Carax conceded with what might have been a smile. But yes, your presence here has changed how this committee operates. We're more rigorous, more willing to dig into uncomfortable truths, more focused on long-term solutions rather than quick fixes. He paused, then added, Some species resent it. They preferred the old system where power and connections mattered more than facts and evidence. But others appreciate having a body that actually pursues justice rather than just maintaining the status quo. You've made the council better, even if you've also made it more uncomfortable. After Carax left, Elder Krathix approached. That was quite the compliment coming from a Draken. They don't usually admit when others have changed their thinking. I'm not sure it was entirely a compliment, Chen said. He also implied that I've made the council uncomfortable. You have, Krathix confirmed. But that's exactly what we needed. Comfort is the enemy of improvement. The old council was very comfortable, very confident in its procedures and traditions, and that comfort nearly led to a grave injustice against your people. He settled into a chair, his gravitational harness humming softly. I have been observing the council for over 400 years, Chen. I have watched it evolve, seen it make good decisions and terrible ones, witnessed its moments of greatness and its periods of corruption. And I can say with certainty, these past 5 years have been the most productive, most genuinely justice-oriented period in living memory. Because of one human on the executive committee? Chen sounded skeptical. Because of what that human represents, Krathix corrected. You are not just an individual. You are the manifestation of everything I warned the council about. The refusal to forget, the patient pursuit of justice, the systematic approach to accountability. But you've proven that these traits, properly channeled, are not threats to civilization. They are civilization's immune system, identifying and addressing problems before they become catastrophic. He looked at her with all 6 eyes. Do you remember what I said 5 years ago? That humanity stood at a crossroads, that you could become either partners or predators. I remember. You chose partnership. But more than that, you demonstrated that even your most dangerous traits could be assets in the right context. You've shown the galaxy that human persistence can build systems as effectively as it can tear them down. You've proven that your refusal to forget can preserve justice as powerfully as it can fuel vengeance. Chen sat down across from him. It hasn't been easy. There are still council members who wish we'd never joined. There are still species that view humanity with suspicion or fear. And honestly, there are still times when I wonder if we made the right choice, if we should have just focused on human space and left the rest of you to your own problems. But you didn't, Krathix said, and that choice has mattered. It has shaped not just the council, but humanity's role in the galaxy. You are no longer newcomers to be tested. You are integral parts of the system, members whose absence would leave a void. And the Chronathi? Chen asked quietly. Krathix understood immediately what she was really asking. You still remember. You haven't forgiven. We remember, Chen confirmed. Every detail. Every manipulation, every lie, every procedural trick they tried. It's all recorded in human archives, taught in our diplomatic schools as a case study in how not to interact with us. 3 generations from now, young humans learning about galactic politics will still be learning about the Chronathi incident. But, she continued, we've also recorded everything that came after. The apology, the reparations, the reforms they implemented, their subsequent cooperation on multiple initiatives, the support they provided when the Gene Collective tried to pull similar tricks against the Verithian colonies. All of that is recorded too. So when our great-grandchildren learn about the Chronathi incident, they'll learn the complete story. A species that wronged us, then chose to make amends, then chose to stand with us against similar injustices targeting others. They'll learn that the Chronathi became better after their mistakes, and that humanity acknowledged that improvement. Krathix's eyes seemed to glow slightly brighter. You're teaching them context, not just the harm but the entire arc. Because that's the truth, Chen said. The Chronathi wronged us and we will never forget that. But they also changed, and we won't forget that either. Human memory is comprehensive, not selective. We remember everything, the good and the bad. That, Krathix said softly, is perhaps the most important thing you've brought to the council. The understanding that memory and justice are not about punishment alone, but about complete accounting. Recording not just the crimes but also the amends, not just the betrayals but also the redemptions. 20 years after the original incident, Ambassador Chen, now retired from active service but still occasionally consulted on important matters, stood in a human university on New Terra. She was giving a lecture to students studying interspecies diplomacy, young people who had grown up in a galaxy where humanity's role was established rather than contested. The Chronathi incident, as it had come to be known in diplomatic circles, was now a foundational case study. Chen had been invited to give a guest lecture about it, to provide first-hand perspective on the events that had shaped modern galactic politics. The lecture hall was packed. Students from multiple species sat in the audience, not just humans. The university had become a prestigious institution for interspecies relations, drawing scholars from across the galaxy who wanted to understand how humanity had transformed from galactic newcomers to influential mediators in just 2 decades. Before I begin, Chen said, looking out at the young faces before her. I want you to understand something fundamental. Everything I'm about to tell you is already a matter of public record. The full proceedings of the council sessions, the investigation results, even my own internal reports, all of it has been made available to researchers, historians, and students like yourselves. She paused. This is deliberate. We made a choice as a species to maintain complete transparency about the Cronathi incident because we wanted future generations to learn from it. We wanted you to understand not just what happened, but why it mattered, and how it shaped everything that came after. A young human student raised her hand. Ambassador Chen, in your reports you mentioned that humanity was one vote away from withdrawing from the council entirely. Looking back, do you think that would have been the better choice? Chen considered the question carefully. In the short term, possibly. Withdrawal would have been simpler, cleaner. We could have focused on human space, avoided the complicated political entanglements of the council, pursued our own interests without constraint. But in the long term? No, because withdrawal would have confirmed the worst fears of species like Elder Krathix's people. It would have shown that humanity only participates in galactic civilization when it's convenient, when we're winning. It would have marked us as fair-weather partners who can't be counted on when things get difficult. She walked down from the podium, moving closer to the students. More importantly, withdrawal would have denied us the opportunity to change the system from within. The reforms we've implemented over the past 20 years, the accountability mechanisms, the investigation protocols, the early warning system, none of that would exist if we'd walked away. Another hand went up, this time from a Valari student. But Ambassador, your species has a reputation for never forgiving. The Elder himself warned the council about this, yet you seem to have forgiven the Cronathi. How do you reconcile this? We haven't forgiven them, Chen said bluntly, and a ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Forgiveness implies forgetting, or at least diminishing the significance of the wrong. We have done neither. Every human alive knows about the Cronathi incident. It's taught in our schools, discussed in our diplomatic training, referenced in our political debates. But, she continued, we've also recognized their subsequent actions. The Cronathi Empire could have continued down the path of deception and manipulation. Instead, they chose accountability. They implemented reforms, paid reparations, and more importantly, they changed their behavior. When other species attempted similar tactics, the Cronathi were among the first to speak up against it. So we haven't forgiven, but we have acknowledged. We remember both the harm and the amends. We maintain a complete ledger, not a selective one. That's the distinction that many species still struggle to understand about us. An older student, possibly a graduate researcher, stood up. Ambassador, some critics argue that humanity's approach to justice is actually a form of institutional intimidation. That species behave better not because they believe in justice, but because they're afraid of human retaliation. How do you respond to that? Chen smiled slightly. I respond by saying, good. If the fear of consequences makes species think twice before committing injustices, then the system is working. That's not intimidation, that's deterrence. It's the foundation of any functional justice system. But, she added, her tone becoming more serious, it only works if the deterrence is paired with genuine fairness. If we punished friends and enemies alike. If we applied our standards consistently regardless of who was involved, then yes, we're just using fear as a weapon. But that's not what we do. She pulled up a holographic display showing various council decisions over the past 2 decades. Look at the data. Human representatives have filed investigations against our own allies when evidence suggested wrongdoing. We've defended species we have no particular relationship with when they were treated unjustly. We've even, in 3 separate cases, ruled in favor of the Cronathi Empire when they were falsely accused by others. The key is consistency. We investigate everyone. We hold everyone accountable. We remember everyone's actions, good and bad. That's not intimidation, that's integrity. And over time, species have learned that cooperating with our investigations and being honest about their actions leads to better outcomes than trying to hide or deceive. A luminal student, their energy matrix flickering with what translated as excitement, asked the next question. What about Elder Krathix? His warning to the council has become legendary. Do you think he exaggerated humanity's dangerous qualities? To make his point, no, Chen said without hesitation. If anything, he was remarkably accurate. Humans are exactly as patient, as unforgiving, and as thorough as he described. The saltine example he cited? We've since confirmed that account through our own historical research. Everything he said about human nature was true. But here's what some people miss. Those qualities are tools. Like any tool, they can be used constructively or destructively. A hammer can build a house or break a window. Human persistence can construct systems of accountability or execute campaigns of revenge. The choice of how to use it matters. She looked around the lecture hall. Elder Krathix gave us a gift when he warned the council. He forced everyone, including us, to confront what we really are. And then he, and others like Counselor Miraseth, gave us something even more valuable. They gave us a choice about what to do with that nature. We chose to build, to create systems that channel our less forgiving traits toward constructive ends, to use our memory as a tool for justice rather than vengeance, to let our patience serve prevention rather than just punishment. That choice didn't change our nature, it directed it. The lecture continued for another hour, with Chen fielding questions about specific diplomatic incidents, the evolution of council procedures, and the complex relationships between humanity and various alien species. But eventually, a young, human student asked the question that Chen had been waiting for. "Ambassador Chen," the student said quietly, "if you could go back to that moment in the council chamber when you were facing an unjust ruling and had to decide how to respond, would you do anything differently?" Chen was silent for a long moment, genuinely considering the question. "Yes and no," she finally said. "The specific words I used, the diplomatic strategies I employed, those I might refine with the benefit of hindsight. But the fundamental approach? No, I wouldn't change that. We were at a crossroads, and we chose partnership over isolation, systematic change over individual revenge, long-term improvement over short-term satisfaction. That choice has defined the past 20 years of human involvement in galactic civilization. It's shaped how other species see us and how we see ourselves." She paused. "But I want you to understand something crucial. We didn't make that choice because we're better than other species, or because we're naturally inclined toward cooperation, or because we've evolved beyond our baser instincts. We made it because 13 people voted for it by a margin of one. One vote. One decision that could easily have gone the other way. That's both sobering and empowering. It's sobering because it reminds us how fragile these choices are, how easily things could have been different. But it's empowering because it shows that choices matter, that individual decisions have consequences, that we're not slaves to our nature but can consciously direct it." She looked directly at the students. "All of you, every species represented in this room, you have the same choice ahead of you. You'll face situations where you need to decide between the easy path and the right path, between self-interest and collective good, between revenge and justice. Your nature, whatever that may be, will pull you in certain directions. But you always have a choice about whether to follow those pulls or redirect them. That's what I hope you take from studying the Kronathi incident. Not just the diplomatic tactics or the political maneuvering, but the fundamental reality that we are all capable of choosing how we respond to injustice. And those choices shape not just our individual futures, but the future of galactic civilization itself." After the lecture, Chen met privately with a very special visitor. Elder Krathix, now approaching 500 standard years of age, had made the journey to New Terra specifically to speak with her. His gravitational harness was more elaborate than it had been 2 decades ago, and his movements were slower, but his 6 eyes still held that piercing intelligence. They sat in Chen's office overlooking the rebuilt colony, the one that had nearly been destroyed by Kronathi manipulations all those years ago. The city below was thriving, a testament to both human resilience and the changed galactic order that had prevented similar incidents. "You've done well," Krathix said without preamble. "Better than I hoped, though not better than I expected." Chen smiled. "There's a distinction there? Hope is emotional. Expectation is analytical. I hoped you would choose partnership, but I expected you to succeed at it once you made that choice. Humans do not do things halfway. Neither do the Velari, apparently. You've been instrumental in reforming the Council. Your people's return to active participation has made a real difference. Krathix made a sound that might have been laughter. We had no choice. Once you showed us that active engagement could be productive rather than frustrating, we could no longer justify our isolation. You shamed us into caring again. He shifted in his harness, looking out at the city. But I did not come here to exchange pleasantries, Chen. I came because I am dying. Chen felt a sudden coldness. Elder, Peace, he interrupted. I am 517 years old. I have lived well beyond the normal Velari lifespan. My death is neither tragedy nor surprise. It is simply the conclusion of a very long story. But before that story ends, I wanted to have one final conversation with you. He turned his 6 eyes on her fully. I wanted to tell you what I have learned from watching humanity over these past decades. I wanted to share observations that I will not have the opportunity to share elsewhere. I'm honored, Elder. Don't be. Not yet. You may not like what I have to say. He paused, gathering his thoughts. 20 years ago, I warned the Council about human nature. I told them you were dangerous, patient, unforgiving. I used fear to prevent injustice. It worked, but it was a crude tool. What I did not tell them, because I did not fully understand it myself at the time, was what makes humanity truly unique. It is not your memory, or your persistence, or your capacity for organized vengeance. Many species have these traits to varying degrees. He leaned forward slightly. What makes humanity unique is your uncomfortable relationship with your own nature. You are the only species I have ever encountered that simultaneously embodies equality and struggles against it. You are unforgiving, yet you create philosophies of forgiveness. You are capable of remarkable violence, yet you build elaborate systems to constrain it. You pursue vengeance across generations, yet you teach your children that revenge is wrong. This internal contradiction, this constant tension between what you are and what you wish to be, it creates something remarkable. It creates the possibility of choice, of conscious direction, of deliberately becoming something other than what your instincts would make you. Chen listened intently, sensing that the elder was building toward something important. Other species, Krathix continued, they are what they are. The Kranathi are ambitious and sometimes deceptive. The Draken are aggressive and territorial. The Luminal are contemplative and slow to act. These traits are simply part of who they are, and they build their civilizations around accommodating them. But humans, you build your civilizations around constraining yourselves. Your laws are not primarily about controlling others, they're about controlling yourselves. Your philosophies are not about understanding the universe, they're about understanding and managing your own natures. Your entire civilization is one long, complicated process of trying to become better than your instincts. He paused. And here is what I have learned. That struggle, that tension, that uncomfortable relationship with your own nature, that is your greatest strength, not a weakness. Because it means you can change, not just as individuals, but as a civilization. You can recognize destructive patterns and consciously alter them. You can identify problems in your own behavior and systematically address them. You can choose to be different tomorrow than you were yesterday and actually follow through on that choice. Chen felt tears forming, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Elder, are you saying that humanity's self-doubt is actually an asset? Not self-doubt, Krathix corrected gently. Self-awareness. The ability to see yourselves clearly, including the parts you don't like, and then do something about it. That's not weakness, that's the foundation of genuine growth. He settled back in his harness. When I warned the Council about humanity 20 years ago, I was afraid of what you might become if provoked. Now, after watching you for 2 decades, I'm afraid of what the galaxy will lose when you finally become comfortable with yourselves. What do you mean? That tension, that struggle, that uncomfortable relationship with your own nature. It drives you to constantly improve, to build better systems, to pursue higher standards. If you ever reach a point where you're satisfied with what you are, if you ever stop struggling to be better, you will lose the very quality that makes you valuable to galactic civilization. He looked at her with all 6 eyes. So I suppose my final lesson is this: stay uncomfortable. Stay aware of your capacity for both great good and terrible harm. Maintain that tension between what you are and what you wish to be, Because it is in that tension that your true strength lies. Chen wiped away a tear. That's a hard teaching, Elder. You're essentially telling us never to be satisfied, never to rest, never to accept ourselves as we are. No, Krathik said softly. I'm telling you that growth requires discomfort, that improvement requires recognizing current imperfection, that becoming better requires acknowledging that you are not yet good enough. This is not a condemnation. It is the price of excellence. He reached out with one limb and Chen took it, feeling the ancient texture of his skin. You have given the galaxy something precious, Chen. You have shown us that even the most dangerous traits can be channeled toward constructive ends. You have demonstrated that nature is not destiny, that conscious choice matters, that civilization is not about accepting what we are, but about deliberately becoming something better. And in doing so, he continued, you have inspired others. The Velari returned to active participation because you showed us that engagement could be meaningful. The Krenathi reformed their practices because you demonstrated that past mistakes need not define future behavior. Dozens of species have improved their accountability systems because you proved that rigorous justice serves everyone better than comfortable corruption. Your legacy is not just the specific reforms you implemented, but the example you set, the proof that species can change, that civilizations can improve, that the future does not have to repeat the failures of the past. Krathik's eyes began to dim slightly, and Chen realized how much effort this conversation was costing him. Rest, Elder, you've said enough. Almost enough, he replied. One more thing. When I die, and the news spreads through the council, there will be pressure for humanity to provide some grand eulogy, some formal statement. Resist that pressure, Elder. I do not want to be remembered with flowery words and diplomatic pleasantries. I want to be remembered accurately. Tell them I was a paranoid old being who nearly lived long enough to see his paranoia proven wrong. Tell them I scared the council into doing the right thing, because I didn't trust them to do it voluntarily. Tell them I spent 500 years being disappointed in galactic civilization, until humanity gave me a reason to hope again. He squeezed her hand with surprising strength. Tell them the truth, Chen. Not the comfortable truth, but the whole truth. That is what I have tried to teach you. And that is the legacy I wish to leave. Truth over comfort. Growth over satisfaction. Conscious choice over natural instinct. I promise, Chen said quietly. Krathix closed his eyes, and for a moment Chen thought he had died right there. But then he opened them again, one last burst of the fierce intelligence that had defined his long life. Good, he said. Then I can rest knowing that my warning was heeded, that humanity found a better path, and that galactic civilization has at least a chance of becoming worthy of the name. That is enough for one very long life. He closed his eyes again, and this time he did not open them. Chen sat with him for several hours, holding the hand of the ancient being who had changed everything with a single warning, who had seen humanity's potential for both destruction and construction, who had chosen to believe in the possibility of better choices. When the Velari medical team finally arrived to care for their elder, Chen stepped outside into the new Terra night. She looked up at the stars, at the vast galactic community that humanity had become part of, at the endless possibilities and challenges that lay ahead, and she thought about tension, about the uncomfortable relationship between what humanity was and what it wished to be, about the constant struggle to become better than instinct alone would make them. It was exhausting. It would always be exhausting. But as Elder Krathix had taught her, that exhaustion was the price of growth, the cost of excellence, the foundation of genuine civilization. Humans don't pardon. They never would. But they could choose what to do with that unforgiving nature, how to channel it, where to direct it. And that choice, renewed every day by every individual and institution, made all the difference. The stars above offered no judgment, no comfort, no easy answers. They simply existed, waiting for whatever choices humanity would make next, and Chen, standing in the night air of a colony that had survived an attempted injustice and thrived because of the choices that followed, felt the weight of that responsibility and accepted it, because that's what humans did. They remembered everything, forgot nothing, and chose every day what to do with that perfect, terrible memory. 6 months after Elder Krathix's death, the Galactic Council held a memorial ceremony. Representatives from every member species attended, along with observers from dozens of unaligned civilizations. The council chamber had been transformed. decorated with symbols from Vihlari culture, alongside representations of the many species the elder had influenced. Ambassador Chen stood at the central podium, now genuinely retired but called back one last time to fulfill her promise. The prepared remarks sat on a tablet in front of her, carefully crafted by a committee to be appropriately reverent and diplomatically safe. She ignored them entirely. Elder Krathix asked me to tell you the truth about him, she began, her voice carrying clearly through every translation matrix. Not comfortable platitudes, but the complete honest truth. So I will. Elder Krathix was paranoid. He spent decades studying humanity, because he was convinced we were a threat to galactic civilization. He maintained surveillance on us that violated every principle of privacy and autonomy that the Council claims to respect. When we finally joined the galactic community, his first instinct was not to welcome us but to warn everyone else about how dangerous we were. A murmur of discomfort rippled through the assembly. This was not how memorial services typically went. He was also judgmental. He looked at the Galactic Council, at the species that had built it and maintained it for thousands of years, and concluded, you were all lazy, corrupt, and complacent. He thought you had become so comfortable with your power and privilege that you had forgotten what justice actually meant. He believed the Council was failing at its most basic purpose, ensuring fairness for all species, not just the powerful ones. The murmur grew louder. Some delegates looked outraged. But Chen continued, and he was absolutely right. About all of it. She paused, letting that sink in. His paranoia saved humanity from being railroaded by a corrupt prosecution. His surveillance, as invasive as it was, provided the data necessary to understand what we really were and what we might become. His judgment of the Council was harsh but accurate. You were failing, and you needed someone to force you to confront that failure. Elder Krathix was not a saint. He was a deeply flawed being who lived long enough to see most of his cynical predictions proven correct. But he was also brave enough to speak uncomfortable truths, persistent enough to maintain his principles, when it would have been easier to let them go, and wise enough to recognize when he might be wrong about humanity's potential. She looked around the chamber. He asked me to tell you that he was disappointed in galactic civilization for most of his 500 years, that the Council, for all its grand traditions and noble rhetoric, had become just another political body serving those with power and connections rather than those seeking justice. But, Chen continued, her voice softening slightly, he also wanted you to know that before he died you gave him hope. The reforms implemented over the past 20 years, the accountability systems, the genuine investigations, the willingness to question comfortable assumptions, these changes proved to him that the Council could improve, that galactic civilization could become worthy of its ideals. Not because you suddenly became better beings, but because you chose to build better systems, because you acknowledged your failures and worked to correct them, because you proved that institutions, like individuals, can change if they're willing to face uncomfortable truths. She picked up the tablet with the prepared remarks and deliberately set it aside. Elder Krathix's legacy is not comfort. It's not diplomatic pleasantries or false reverence. His legacy is the uncomfortable truth that we all need someone willing to tell us when we're failing, someone who refuses to let us hide behind tradition or procedure or political convenience. His legacy is the warning he gave to the Council about humanity, that we are dangerous, patient, and unforgiving, but also his demonstration that those very qualities, properly directed, can serve justice rather than undermine it. His legacy is his return to active Council participation after centuries of isolation, showing that it's never too late to engage, never too late to try to make things better, never too late to believe in the possibility of positive change. Chen's voice grew stronger. And his legacy is this lesson, which he taught me in our final conversation, that growth requires discomfort, that improvement requires acknowledging imperfection, that civilization is not about accepting what we are, but about deliberately choosing to become something better. So I will not stand here and tell you that Elder Krathix was a perfect being who will be deeply missed. That would be a comfortable lie. Instead, I tell you that he was a paranoid, judgmental, deeply cynical being who lived long enough to be proven both right and wrong, right about the dangers and problems, wrong about whether they could be overcome. And yes, she concluded, he will be deeply missed, not because he made us comfortable, but because he made us better. not because he accepted us as we were, but because he challenged us to become what we could be. Not because he believed in us from the start, but because he gave us the chance to prove ourselves worthy of belief. The Velari have a saying, "Truth outlives comfort." Elder Krathix embodied that principle, and if we truly want to honor his memory, we will do the same. We will choose uncomfortable truth over comfortable lies. We will pursue justice even when it's inconvenient. We will remember both our failures and our successes, our wrongs and our amends. Because that is what the Elder taught us, and that is how we ensure his very long life mattered. Chen stepped down from the podium. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, one delegate began to applaud. Then another, and another. It was not the universal enthusiastic applause of a popular speech. Some delegates sat in stony silence, clearly disturbed by Chen's bluntness. Others applauded politely but without enthusiasm. But many, the Luminal Collective, the Verithians, the Free Traders Union, and dozens of other species, applauded genuinely, vigorously, acknowledging that they had just heard something rare and valuable, a truth that challenged them rather than comforted them. And in a section reserved for the Velari delegation, the new elder, a being named Shalmira who had been one of Krathix's students, stood and raised all 6 of her limbs in a traditional gesture of respect. "Truth outlives comfort," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "My predecessor would have been pleased with this memorial. He would have hated the decoration and the formality, but he would have loved the honesty. Ambassador Chen has honored him properly by telling uncomfortable truths that we need to hear." She paused. "The Velari remnant makes this pledge. We will continue the work Elder Krathix began. We will speak uncomfortable truths when they need speaking. We will challenge comfortable assumptions when they need challenging. We will refuse to let this council slide back into the complacency that nearly cost us humanity's partnership. This is how we honor the dead among our people, not with reverence for what they were, but with commitment to what they taught. Elder Krathix taught us that truth matters more than comfort, that justice requires constant vigilance, that civilization is built through conscious choice rather than natural drift. Let those lessons outlive him. Let them shape the future of this council. Let them remind us generation after generation that we are only as good as the choices we make and the truths we're willing to face." The assembly, confronted with this double dose of uncomfortable honesty, sat in contemplative silence. The memorial had not gone as anyone expected. There had been no flowery eulogies, no diplomatic pleasantries, no comfortable celebration of a life well lived. Instead, there had been truth. Difficult, challenging, uncomfortable truth. And in that, truth, Elder Krathix's final lesson echoed through the chamber, that civilization is not built on comfort, but on the willingness to face uncomfortable realities and make difficult choices. Humans don't pardon, they don't forget, but they can choose what to build with that perfect memory. And on that day, in that memorial, humanity chose to build something worthy of an elder who had lived 500 years waiting to see if galactic civilization could be better than his cynical expectations. He had lived long enough to find out, and the answer, though imperfect and incomplete, was yes.